Sunday evening. With me, we have a very special guest, but we'll get to him last. As always, we have Peter Ray Allison.
Good evening, everyone.
And we have Mark Canty.
Hello, everyone.
And our special guest tonight, and it's a deep honour, sir, Gav Thorpe.
Hello.
Gav Thorpe. Sorry, my dog's just decided at that moment in time that he wanted to kick off. So
I am your dog.
Yeah. There's an next door neighbour's dog, and whenever he hears it, he goes fucking mental, and he's going mental. Just literally when I just about to introduce you, it's just like, that's the time that I'm going to kick off. But there you go. But yes, as you can hear him in the background now. Shut up. Hell, dog. Jesus Christ. Anyway, so Gav, thank you very much for joining us. It's very exciting. Massive 40k nerds here, so yeah, you're gonna get a lot of questions. I've got a ream of them from other people as well. So okay, so first off, for everybody who's lived under a rock or probably isn't a Warhammer geek, can you tell people who are you? What are you doing?
Who am I? Well, currently I am Gav Thorpe, mostly known as a writer for Black Library Games Workshop's publishing imprint for novels of Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000. And prior to that, I was a games developer in the Games Workshop studio working on the games that inspired those novels. And I was there for 14 years. So from basically 1993 to the present day, however many years that is, some years. I've been involved with the Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000 universities to some greater or lesser extent. And particularly if you got into Warhammer or Warhammer 40,000 during the 90s, you would have seen my face a lot in White Dwarf, basically. And there were whole issues where my face was nearly on every article. So yeah, that's my pride.
Third and fourth editions?
Well, 40k, yeah. So, so when I joined Games Workshop was just after second edition came out. Like I say, 1993. In the November, it came out in the September. I joined in the November, and one of the first projects I worked on was the Dark Millennium supplement for that. Right. And when I say worked on, what I mean is I was responsible for gluing the mock-ups of the War Gear cards onto playing cards. So I had nothing to do with the rules at that stage.
Was that the equivalent of getting coffee for them then? Was that the Games Workshop equivalent?
Yeah, that was pretty much. Well, that was kind of. Funny enough, I when I applied for Games Workshop, there's a much longer version. Well, I won't go into it now. But essentially, I ended up writing a letter to Games Workshop asking for a job, and it said I basically said if you need anyone to empty the bins at the studio, I'm up for it. Because I just, and that was it really. And I was lucky enough through timing and various other things that they were looking for assistant games developers, and that's how I started. So yeah, not quite fetching the coffee, but yeah, it was. Oddly enough, the dog's body kind of job of games development isn't that terrible because it's like playing games and checking stuff and yeah. But we started the Citadel Journal. Which was a kind of an exercise in writing and publishing all rolled into one, just as a sort of non-mainstream, I suppose, like sub-White Dwarf place they could put us where we could just make stuff up and get it all wrong and learn out basic layout and publishing and all that kind of stuff. So it was really useful, actually. I think it's the skills that I learned in those first couple of years as an assistant games developer. And then on White Dwarf as a staff writer and a photographer and doing layout and desktop publishing and going to printers and looking at magazines passed on press and all this kind of stuff, which a lot of games designers don't get a chance to do. And you see a lot of it these days. I back a lot of Kickstarters, but you can see there's different skills that go into that. And I've been fortunate enough to know a lot of people from my time at Games Workshop who do that stuff and rub stuff off, but actually have had to do some of it. So while I wouldn't say I'm a graphic designer by any stretch of the imagination, and I wouldn't expect people to pay me money to do it, I know enough of the basics that I can get into trouble quite quickly until somebody who does know what they're doing and stuff like that. So it was a very rounded beginning that a lot of people don't necessarily get to have in this industry. And then 1997, so a few years later, Games Workshop decided to set up an imprint called the Black Library, which started off with a bi-monthly magazine of short stories and short comic strips and little kind of background pieces. And I had my first short story published in issue 2 of that. And that was just a nice fortuitous. I happened to be 2 desks down from Andy Jones, who started up the imprint, and he asked if I wanted to, I was doing background stuff for the game, so he asked if I wanted to try writing a short story, and I did.
What was the short story?
It was called Birth of a Legend, and it was basically about Sigmar getting the Hammer of Sigmar. So just a little topic on the edge of the background that nobody knew about. It was. So that was it, and it was a lot of fun. And then that was 1997. I was there for 14 years, and then in 2007, it was sort of like early 2008, just as the financial world was crashing around us, and I just got a mortgage at the top of the market. I left Games Workshop to go freelance. It's been 50-50 they wanted me to go, and 50-50 I wanted to leave. So
jump before you were pushed.
Well, Well, they helped me jump basically, and I've still got the same mortgage today. So I decided then. So the Black Library carried on, but I've done freelance stuff for video games and other games design stuff. I have a trilogy of novels published through Angry Robot called The Crown of the Blood, sort of an original fantasy trilogy and stuff. So I've got to do a few different things over the years, which is quite fun.
Yeah, and in 2017 you won the David Gemmell Award for Epic Fantasy.
I did, yes, for my Age of Sigmar novel War Beasts.
Yeah.
Yes. So that was surprising and very nice. I wasn't really expecting that at all. There's been a couple of Warhammer writers who've been shortlisted recently. I mean, Graham McNeil famously also won it for a Warhammer novel, for a Sigmar novel, funnily enough. I was pleased with that, and especially considering some of the people I was up against, like Mark Lawrence and things, were very large fan bases and stuff. But so it was nice. I kind of took it as a bit of a lifetime achievement.
Star as well, by the way.
Yeah, that's right.
The boss demands attention.
Just
Actually, one thing I was going to ask is, sorry.
It just went down. So if you said anything important, my OBS just kind of went no. So if you said anything important there, you might want to repeat it.
For how long?
No, it was literally the Oh no! Need to get back up again. Oh no, Matt, you idiot. You absolute moron. There you go. Join call.
You do a combination of stuff, which is they've got a schedule of things that they want to potentially release books alongside, and they'll approach various authors and say, "Are you interested in writing about the Dark Angels or this sort of thing?" And then, but at the same time, I've got ongoing series and ideas and things, so you're pitching ideas to them and they're like, oh, actually cool, yeah, well, that sounds like a great idea, we'll slot that into the schedule here. And so there's an ongoing dialogue with the editors, really, and they have an ongoing, obviously, acquisitions meetings with our sales teams and all that kind of stuff. So it's a bit different from a normal publisher, I suppose, because everything's commission. There's no kind of slush pile. I don't have to write an entire novel and then hope they pick it up, which is what you generally would do. Again, I was kind of lucky with Angry Robot in that it was set up by Mark Gascoigne, who used to run Black Library and was looking for authors for their initial range. And so it was basically phoning up all these old Black Library contacts and things and saying, do you want to write a novel? And I still had to pitch, and so it wasn't a shoe-in. I just still had to come up with an idea that they liked and provide a sample and stuff. But unfortunately, I didn't have to write the entire novel before they commissioned it. And then through things, and then there's slightly more kind of integrate things like the Horus Heresy series, which is a big multi-author series. So we and now we're into the Siege of Terror. So we had very regular meetings with the editorial team and the other authors, and also other elements of the company like Forge World, who have been developing the background and creating models and stuff like that. So and then the editorial team act as that connection through to the rest of Games Workshop, the design studio. So so for example, the novel just recently out was Indomitus, which is a tie into the new Indomitus box set. So that was one that they came to me and said, we're doing a new box set. Would you like to do the tie-in novel for that? It's like, yes, that sounds great. And they go, here's what's in it, and here's the background that's been written for it so far. Unfortunately, that was one that didn't have a very defined story. It was more of an expansion of the background and quite a big picture stuff about this thing called the Pariah Nexus and all this kind of stuff. So they said they wanted a very character-driven story for that one rather than a big kind of space opera type thing. So that's how that one came about. Whereas something like a lot of the Eldar novels, the Phoenix Laws novels, and things like that are stuff that I'm a big fan of, and I've come to them and said, it's like, I think it'd be great to do a regular series based around these characters, and this is how I want to do it, and stuff like that. So there's a mix of stuff. But if there's stuff needed from the studio, then it kind of comes through them. So yeah, it's interesting because I think they trust me. Or I tend to get trusted with stuff because of my background as a games developer, and I used to be Warhammer lore master, so I used to run the Warhammer team. But also, I had spent a period when we had what was called a key design team, and I was actually lead background designer for that. So I was in charge of the background development for both Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000. So when I say, if I put something, unless I've got it absolutely wrong or something's tweaked in the latest codex or something, it's usually like, I don't tend to get much feedback that says, are you sure it works this way? Because they kind of just assume I know it. And that's the advantage. It's also a bit of a trap, though, because stuff does change. And certainly, with stuff like the Primaris and Age of Sigmar, which I've had no connection to, I've had no involvement in that development any time over the years, sort of thing. So I am constantly having to look stuff up and research it and make sure that what I've got is the version that's being kind of is out there that everyone else is sharing, as opposed to some nugget in the back of my head from a conversation with Rick Priestley 20 years ago. I go, well, I know these guys because they're like this. It doesn't necessarily, I don't get to pull that card out quite so often now because it's all moved on so far. It's hard work.
Yeah, because the system keeps evolving, they keep introducing new elements to it. I mean, one thing I find interesting about Black Library is that it seems like this massive shared world, but with a very directed tone to it. How do you pitch a story, or rather, how do they approach your story? How much do you know in advance, when you're plotting characters? Because obviously the Horus Heresy has a very definite timeline, and you're fitting a book in a very specific spot on that timeline. How do you make sure everything ties up with each other without going insane?
Well, that's the bit you just go insane. The Siege of Terror stuff. So basically the last 8 books, the culmination of the series. So the Horus Heresy has gone through various phases of it, and none of them were necessarily particularly planned until towards the end. So it was a trilogy of kind of books, and I wasn't actually involved right at the start. I was, I was still working at the studio then, and had other projects and things. So I came on board a little bit after that period, and it was phenomenally successful when it started. So they realised they've got a bit of a go here, okay, and sort of like the idea expanded out from whatever its initial plans were to become this kind of more ongoing narrative setting type thing, and the stories expanded from that initial trilogy out into all of the stuff to explore about the heresy and all the different legions and primarchs and other things, and then sort of, as we sort of hit about the halfway mark, just in terms of sheer number of books, it was becoming clear that it needed a bit more direction. There was loads of all of the obvious sort of existing background events had been ticked off and covered, and some new stuff had been introduced, and some there'd been some revelations and this and the other. But pretty much all the big hits had kind of been played, as it were. And in the extant background, it kind of then goes la la la, and then there's loads of fighting, and then they go to terror, and that's what we call the Age of Darkness. Actually, nobody knows what happened for these 6 years or so of war, engulfed the galaxy. But we didn't want to just kind of be all over the place. So it started, we had things like the Unremembered Empire and the Thramas Crusade and various other things that happened. But then we started, from the community and also from ourselves, we started wanting, it's like we need to start this arrowing back into that conflict at Terra. But that took a long time because we created this big beast, and everyone wants to hear about their favorite Primarch and their favorite Legion and this little episode that was here or whatever. So kind of getting that back on track and then focusing it down, having created this massive, expansive universe within a universe, basically. And then into the Siege of Terror, which was these very specific books on a very specific timeline. So the first 2 meetings were just sitting down with calendars and all the extant material and go, this has to happen by here, and this is how long we've got to do this, and this is what happens here, and then and try to work out how many books that's going to need and what the beats are going to be and all that kind of stuff. And it was all, and so whereas the main Heresy series had kind of just evolved and been allowed to grow, and then was kind of whipped into shape towards the end to focus it back into the Siege of Terror. Every book has been very planned and layered of who has to be in it and what the beats are going to be. So we've each been able to tell our story that we've seen it, but we've had a goal, I suppose, that we're trying to hit. So with, for example, with The Last Wall, it was all about the Lionsgate spaceport, and the stories I could tell around that. But yeah, just the sheer number of kind of threads going in and check in and the length of the books, and just I could have written another 50,000 words of that and there'll still be people saying, oh yeah, but you didn't cover this, or we didn't do that very, I wanted to see more of this thing. And there's each of the authors. So John French did the first one, and he was the guinea pig, and he was brilliant, and he did all this maps of the solar defenses and set up stuff brilliantly running and things like that. And Guy Haley did the second book. But as each of us complete start a book, you get into it and you realise the scope of what you've got to try and do and the space you've got to try and do it in and stuff. And then there's this real 1,000-yard stare at the meetings, and everyone else not written one of their books yet. They're like, oh yeah, and then each of us in turn has just start to get that, yeah, no, this is crazy. I don't know how to do this. And of course, we're still coming up with ideas, of like, oh yeah, but cool. And we're really getting into like the metaphysics of the Emperor versus Horus and stuff we want to expand and use and excuse and perpetuate and all this kind of stuff. So it's like, it's not only getting this massive funnel of the main series, and we can't do every single story and nothing gets tied up in a bow necessarily and stuff. But people want to see those characters at that end. And again, there's still lots of big hits from the existing material that people want to see. So you've got to do all that, plus give them something new, and maybe try and put a new spin on something so people think about stuff in a slightly different way, or see it from the point of view of a different character and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, and then so at the end of it, it's relief as much as anything that you've got this thing done and out, and it's so yeah, crazy.
The one thing, the Horus Heresy books, which I absolutely adore, I think they're just amazing. But the one thing that I love about the Horus Heresy is how they're portraying the Emperor and how he seems to be this fallible human. He's just super. He's super like. He's godlike, but he's not a god. And I like that they're starting to throw in a lot of stuff. Like, he has a name and he has flaws, and he has sort of the way he treats his tools, effectively the Primarchs and things. And I love that. I think that is an amazing sort of direction to go in.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that's kind of various things have changed, like from sort of like Horse Rising and through quite a lot of the series, and pretty much until Deliverance Lost, actually, which was my first novel. Most of the Primarchs were always seen from outside. You were never inside their heads. There were all these kind of numinous beings, these demigods that were changing the galaxy and stuff, but it was always from the Space Marines. And then as we got into the series, we started to see inside the heads and get that point of view a little bit more. But always through, it's always been, you will never see inside the Emperor's head. Not direct. Because the mystery of it and the discussion of it and and like I said, that kind of, because he is all things to all people, both in the real world and within the universe. The custodians see him as a certain way, and the Primarchs see him in another way, and the Space Marines and normal people and stuff. And because he has this projection, he has this influence on the world, and nobody quite knows what he is, except maybe a handful of individuals, some of whom we've got to meet now in the Siege of Terror and through the Perpetuals and stuff. And that's always going to be true. And that's one of the fun things about Heresy, is like, we have this fact one, this happened here, and this, but actually the story underneath it and how that actually affected people and why it happened and what the fallout was, that can change and add different context to it. And so the Emperor is always going to be this slightly unknowable, focus of discussion, I suppose, which is cool. I mean, I think just in the Heresy, but also 40k in general, one of the things that spurs the most discussion and the most involvement are the gaps. the mysteries, the things that aren't. 40K's never tried to have a complete timeline of everything and every single detail. One, to allow players to kind of create their own armies and their own stories and things, but also because for me, that also hands out the storytelling and the development to everybody. It's like your view of the mystery around the two missing legions is just as valid as everybody else's. There is no real answer. As a good example, and I think that's important. There's not like a haha with there's this big tome of knowledge, but we're not going to let you know because just we're gits like that. It's like no, they're just genuine mysteries that are left there, and anyone's interpretation on the facts may or may not be just like real historical interpretation, depending on the text you've got available, and your knowledge of the times may be right or may be wrong, and it can be theory rather than fact. And I think that's cool. You don't get a lot of that in a lot of IPs because they tend to be very defined.
Do you feel, with that in mind, do you feel that the two Lost Legions will never really have any lore behind them? Literally, they are just a plot device for people to create things themselves?
Yeah, they're pretty much. I mean, I'd be very surprised. I mean, that said, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, people were saying, "Oh, would the Primarchs ever return?" It's like, no, because at the time, when Alan Merritt was IP manager, he said the Primarchs would never return. Of course, we've got Rebooted Gilliman has come back, so I would never say never, but there's just no payoff for answering that question that's worth getting rid of all of the other potential that's behind it, and so because everybody's theory is correct at the moment. As soon as you answer it, either nobody's right, but it's like, well, how do you come up with something that nobody's guessed, and you're trying to kind of pull the rug from under people almost by going, you didn't guess what it was up to. It's actually they were all just like space rats, or something stupid. You heard it here first.
Space Skaven.
Or some people, yes, absolutely. Well, that's something entirely different. Or some people are proven right and they go, and everyone else is proven wrong, and they're like, oh wow, okay, well, my theory is no longer valid. Yeah. So
once you open the box, someone's going to be upset.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Warhammer 40K nerds aren't known for their diplomatic views on things.
I mean, the Lost Legions are basically an excellent narrative tool for when you're creating an army. I mean, I've created dozens of armies which were one of the fabled Lost Legions, and that's from my perspective was like my little input in that kind of 40K lore. And no, it's not canon, it's not legitimate, but it's just headcanon.
But I think that's the thing, and that's very much that's absolutely the core, and various folks and writers and people involved with it have tried to kind of get this idea across. It's like this use of the word canon. You go, there is no canon. Right? There's certain established facts at any given time, depending on and the closest there is to canon is what was in the latest codex. Yeah. And then there's a slightly secondary layer, which is like what's in the Forge books and the Black Library books and things like that, and essentially what was before that hasn't been directly contradicted since. Yeah. Because sometimes just because something's not been mentioned for 20 years doesn't mean it's actually been taken out of the game or the universe. It's just it's been irrelevant to the battle game as it's been developed and stuff like that. Because that's one of the other things is as it's gone on. Rogue Trader when it came out was essentially started off as an RPG, but then became a miniatures game essentially, and lots of the element in the background reflected that, and the style of it. And as it's moved more and more and more towards a battle game and a big battle game and stuff like that, obviously the background's honed in towards that, which doesn't mean all the stuff. Yay! Now, is that an original, or is that one? I can show you mine, but the pages are falling out later. Hang on.
Oh yeah,
my Jeeves dealers have gone missing. Oh, yeah, well, I was thinking about it. Should I get the reprint? And it's like, well, I don't know. The old one might feel bad. It's being replaced by a younger model. There's something about this. I now have to open it with kind of reverence.
You really want to read that?
Yeah, exactly.
For the last time before it goes poof.
There was a bit of old canon, or obviously the old lore about the Warhammer world, the fantasy battle world, that it used to be a world within the 40K universe, but covered in warp storms.
Kind of. I don't think that's ever really been. I think
Was it in a White Dwarf or something? I can't remember exactly.
there may,
Okay.
there may have been something like that. I mean, there was little hints. There was a couple of jokey hints. I mean, I did some myself when we did a summer campaign for Warhammer called Dark Shadows, which was set on the misty Isle of Albion, and at the end of it, 3 armies got. That was loads of puns in that campaign. Not enough puns in 40k in Warhammer these days. And there were 3 devices, the 3 magic items that you basically got from that, and it was because it's all tied into the old ones, which is kind of part of the 40k mythos. But actually, sorry, the 3 items were basically a power fist, a power sword, and I can't remember what the other thing was. But back in the day, like where the old original Realm of Chaos books and stuff, you could have like a Chaos mutation turn up, and your guy has a las cannon. So there was. But the idea was, I think it was that these were different realities, but they're linked through the Realm of Chaos. The Realm of Chaos being this dimension that exists outside of time and space, but actually, in theory, and it kind of still slightly to this day applies in that you kind of still get the same special demonic characters in the one because also there's just the really real world thing of it's a bit like the Horus Heresy itself, like you don't want to have 2 miniatures ranges, so one range of demons that serves 40k and Warhammer, including special characters and stuff like that. Yay, that's just one load of codes rather than doubling up. But there's always been like real world difficulties in dealing with like the demons and stuff. But yeah, but I've always kind of taken they're more kind of riffs on the same themes. Warhammer was a fantasy take. So again, there was the old ones and this collapse of civilization, and that was like over a period of about 8,000 years in the life of the Warhammer world, whereas that story is told over 60 million years in the 40k universe. And actually, there isn't a point in the history of 40k where there was a world that was the Warhammer world, which of course isn't there. And especially now with Age of Sigmar, having blown it up and turned it into all these different mortal realms and spheres of existence and stuff anyway. But again, that's but there's still another riff on that central idea, because there still was the Age of Myth and Age of Chaos, and now the kind of the present Age of Sigmar. So it's different, but it's still the same. It's a different take on those same conceptual pillars, I suppose. Dark Future was another one,
How do you?
40k world, sorry, had the whole idea of the original human empire and all the other ones, and then you had the dark period where everything was mixed up, and then the empire and the Horus Heresy where they were dragging themselves back out of darkness.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there's the dark age of technology and the idea, again, things that were hinted at and never been explained, like and some of the stuff that I've contributed and stuff that was before about, did the machines rise up? Essentially because 40k and Warhammer, the original sort of Warhammer, basically played on every single archetype there is to play on. So if you'd read about it in sci-fi, whether it's Death Worlds or Machine Revolutions, or Foundation or Asimov or anything else up until about, probably, given Rick's age, probably anything up to about 1978. He probably didn't read anything in the last 10 years before he actually wrote it. But Dune, obviously, influence and stuff. All of that stuff was thrown in there. And Doctor Who, lots of, again, a very British creation. I think that's the other things about them. They're not. There was lots of very glitzy kind of high fantasy and high sci-fi, space opera and Star Trek-y kind of stuff. But actually, the stuff that's in 40k is very British, and stuff that's in Warhammer as well. And I think that was one of its appeals at the time, I think, and still is, that lack of shininess, and it's not going to be all right. We're all going to die. Very 80s, very 2 minutes to midnight.
Not very nihilistic, isn't it? It's very nihilistic in tone.
Yeah, it is. And this is where you sort of deal with it, the background in a slightly different way. So, like, as a developer and writer of codex and stuff, and that's very much your take, is like, this is all kind of spitting into the wind, shaking your fist at death, but they're all going to die. But actually, when I'm writing novels, even like when you're writing about very dubious characters and stuff like that, or even for the good guys, as it were, for any given value of good, there are, despite the overwhelming kind of crushing nature of the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, or whatever it is, there is still space for individual acts of heroism. And that's where it counts almost. Heroism isn't being able to save the day. Heroism is saving the person next to you, or the hive, or the planet. It doesn't matter if it's going to get destroyed again tomorrow. It's fighting despite that lack of ultimate victory rather than with a hope for it, I think.
Yeah,
Facing death and spitting it in the eye.
Yeah. I mean, the 40K universe is kind of populated by shades of grey until about the Tau came. Is it Tau or Tor?
Tau.
Tau, definitely.
Until the Tau came along, and they were kind of very much about the greater good, and I found they were kind of a very fundamental good, if naive, race with no psychos. So
super annoying to play against.
I love
super
it.
annoying to play against.
I love it because it's mechs and.
That was it. Well, again, it's like it's one of those. It was quite a generational thing, really.
Yeah.
Generational, not quite. So it's personal tastes as well. In that, when it came to introducing a new race, there was a very obvious archetype, sci-fi archetype, which was the manga-esque anime robot, Battletech, well, not battle, sort of Robotech and kind of Gundam-esque suits. And Jez Goodwin, and myself were very keen on big fighty robots and stuff like that. And it's weird because it's one of those that people like John Blanche and Rick didn't really understand because it wasn't their thing. It wasn't European and history and all that kind of stuff, but they understood. And actually, we had this very new background as well. Again, so it wasn't part of the, it was very kind of new world versus old world, not part of this old crumbling empire, this new upstart race. Yes, naive, ridiculously naive, but again, to shine a light then on everything else. By comparison, it's like technology is not cursed or psychic, or or surrounded by superstition, or literally infested with demons, or anything. All this kind of stuff, which suddenly made everything else more stark, actually, by their existence, and the fact that, and we also use them just to showcase, because they were actually this. I dislike the fact they're called the Tau Empire because they're not an empire. They're like they're more of a confederation. That's the whole point. But Tau Confederation is a very long title. We used it just to there are lots of other races in the galaxy as well that we don't necessarily talk about. They're not worth a whole army list, and they're not big galactic players and stuff. And the Tau, are moderately powerful in this very small sector of space. They're big fish in a very small pond where they are, kind of stuff. And so there's kind of a bit of that, and so it felt there was a whole bunch of ideas around at the time. They all ended up in the Tau or the Necrons, one way or the other. And one of the ideas was the equivalent of the space dogs of war, this allied force. So the idea the Tau formed the center of it, but they'd have all of these different auxiliary troops like the Kroot, and then later on Vespid and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, it was very different. Rather than the kill the Xenos, kill the mutant, just absolute kind of dogmatic, superstitious medievalism of the Imperium, but lots of the other stuff that surrounds the Imperium. This was the aliens were the ones who were almost closest to us in terms of modern sensibility and morals. But of course, that's not quite true, and it's certainly been sort of like muddied, well, not muddied, but darkened and grimmed a little bit. Depending on the writer that's dealing with them.
Yeah, I find it quite interesting because, until the Tau came along, the Imperium was seen as the nominal good guys of the 40K, and then you see the Tau, and when you cast that and compare them to the Imperium, then suddenly the Imperium doesn't seem that as good as it once did. Yeah,
I mean, it's the without getting because this is a geeky podcast, not like people doing their philosophy theses and stuff like that, which I'm clearly undertaught to kind of talk about in any detail and stuff like that. But essentially, once you start getting into good, evil, and all that kind of stuff, and comparative morality and things like that, essentially. But the thing is, Imperium is us as humans, and whatever else happens and however you portray stuff, unless you're willing for our own species to die out, one way or another, we as humans root for the humans, in whatever fiction it is, and the fact that the humans, for their part, are terrible, or the system, the Imperium itself, is this terrible, uncaring, fascistic, mega church, all the things that are worst about humanity, really, still, that's the kind of dichotomy of it, but they're still us.
Yeah,
they're still humans. We can't relate to humans in the 41st millennium in any kind of meaningful way, but we have to because we're writing fiction about them. The same with the Space Marines and stuff. We humanize things that in the same way that the world, always try to get across to people. Go, oh, why is it like that? It doesn't work. You're like, yeah, that's the point. You know, the Imperium doesn't function. It's just collapsing and falling apart. It's a galactic empire that, in the same way that, you know, any kind of empire that was divided by the seas or whatever, you know, the problems of large scale communication, transport, and all that kind of stuff means that actually it's just a million worlds that all kind of just nominally are held together by this concept called the Imperium, and then now and again they might actually bump into each other and their armies, you know, get sent somewhere else. But actually, that idea that their worldview is anyway rational, in the same way that the having a conversation with somebody from the 14th century, that they would have any concept of our modern rationality. It's like, no. Now we have to give them some of that, because in the same way you do for aliens and stuff, when you're writing a protagonist in a novel or something like that, so that people aren't just going, huh? And in the same way that they get humanized in historical fiction and things like that, you know. But actually, yeah, your Imperial Guardsman is not, you know, is not an American GI. You know, his thought processes of fighting for the God Emperor are not the same as the guy who's kind of, you know, salutes the red, white, and blue or whatever. But that's kind of underneath it. You know, we can't, like I say, you can only hint at those kinds of things, I think, because otherwise you just create this completely unapproachable edifice, and everyone will be just like, I don't know what that's all about.
There's a joke, isn't there, of the mum walking in, getting ready for Christmas, and saying to the poor bloke in the blue shirt, "So, which one's the good guys?"
Yeah.
And he just sits there and goes,
Space Marines hit on 3+. That's it.
Oh, rerolls.
One thing I was going to ask as well is, given the amount of lore in the 40k universe, I mean, you're talking hundreds of books, how do you keep track of it all? I mean, how do you kind of keep all the different threads in line? And
you don't really. I mean, I think, and that's potentially one of the issues, but also but the sheer vastness of it and how it very little, because there isn't that canon in a sense. You really only need to work with one or two authors who maybe have written something around there. So, for example, when Guy Haley was doing Valador and a few other books about the Eldar, Guy and I are quite good friends anyway, but, you know, he kind of got in contact and asked a couple of questions, and he had read the Path of the Eldar books that I'd done and stuff, and just, you know, a couple of questions about that and tied it into that. And so, although there's loads and loads of these books, most of them are very much down their own channels. You know, it's like if you're writing about the Blood Angels, then actually there's only these 6 books, really. If you're writing about the Dark Angels, there's only these 7 books. If you and even then, most of those are self-contained as well. That's the thing, is everything feels. That's one of the kind of wonderful things about it. Everything feels part of this massive universe, but any given bit is actually fairly isolated. You know, Dan Abnett's Gaunt's Ghosts and things, you know, is famously, you know, it's a few hundred years in the past, and it's this thing called the Makarian Crusade, and it covers, you know, loads and loads of worlds, which of course is a tiny fragment of the Imperium at large. And so you have this massive campaign and war and all these characters and regiments and stuff like that, all of which is, as you got as an author, you've got total plausible deniability to have nothing to do with them, which is the biggest strength in a way of 40k, is that unless you've got a big name character, which has been more of over the last few years, of like Dante or, you know, Marnie's Calgar, or, you know, any number of named individuals, but even then, you know, their lives spanned centuries, some of them millennia, if you get to play around with the Eldar and stuff like I do. So the chance of any two particular storylines clashing, as long as you couch stuff in a certain way of like, well, this is, you know, around about the time of the Heresy, or around about the time of this thing that happened, and you don't say, well, on the 22nd of May on Trafalgar Square, Minus Calgar met Dante, and somebody later then says, you know, oh, well, actually, I think you'll find they were in Piccadilly Circus. You know, that's because that's the thing. You also, and there's quite a bit of this now within Doctor's Crusade, particularly. You vague it up a bit. Basically, these are events of the current time, and there is a kind of chronology there, but actually, you know, there's time for everything to fit in the same way that Batman isn't dead of old age now.
Yeah.
You know, because it's like, well, you just go and tell another Batman story. It doesn't matter. You go back and tell it when he was young. Well, we've already got 20 stories when he's a young Batman. Well, it doesn't matter. This is a different one. Oh yeah, because it's a cool Batman story. It's another riff. It's almost that same idea of if you were writing about an historical event like World War II, you wouldn't say, oh well, you know, somebody's written about the fall of Berlin. I can't do that because the basics of the characters and the events may be the same or stuff, but actually the story you tell could be vastly different. So my story of the Blood Angels at the end of the 41st millennium could be very different from Jim Swallow's or Guy Haley's, and so even if they potentially clash, they're all still valid in the same way that all those stories about Stalingrad are all still valid because none of them are defining truth. They're all stories about, if that makes sense.
From a certain point of view.
Yeah.
Given like like various authors collaborate on often the same subject or the same particular line, how gentle are you with their characters?
Well, again, it's not. I mean, other than the Heresy, really.
Yeah.
Just because, for what you said about getting your head around a storyline, and also just because things tend to be kind of end up being commissioned in trilogies and stuff like that, so that you tend to have a bit of a run with a certain faction or storyline anyway. So I'm not the only person who's written about the Dark Angels, but I'm the person that's written the most about Dark Angels. And I'm not planning to write much more about them anytime soon, except Luther coming. Yes, there you go, Angels of Darkness. That's why, one particular book. That came about because Mark Gascoigne at the time said to me, "Do you want to write a Space Marines novel?" And I said, "Not really. I don't find them that interesting." And so and in a very Marco way, which was brilliant. And he just said to me, "Well, why didn't you try and write a novel that's interesting then?" So and it's like that was the he's like laying the challenge to me, like not find something in the Space Marines that's interesting, but find something in the Space Marines that I thought I could make interesting. So it's like, he was very good at that sort of thing. Just getting into your head a little bit, and so that was it. And so I kind of alighted on the idea of the Dark Angels and the internal conflict. And it was just as Sabretooth Games was starting the Horus Heresy CCG, and Alan Merritt was starting to do little snippets of background for that. And I had a conversation with him about this idea of old legions and new legion, and that was kind of where it came from. And also I'd very recently watched Memento and the idea of the kind of two storylines.
Oh yes.
So I love that, and I've done that a couple of times now. And it's been used in a couple of other films and stuff, but the revelation going backwards one way while the story progresses forward another way was kind of like the basis of the idea of the current events and the interview delving back towards the original Heresy and stuff like that. So, and that was a one-off. There was never any intent that was going to follow that up, but then it made sense because when I was asked to write a Space Marine Battles novel, which was a series of novels based on very specific events that were already in the background. And so there was like a double whammy for me of like doing the Dark Angels, because I'd worked on the studio product, which was Storm of Vengeance, which was set in the Pacina campaign, which was the prequel basically to what happened in Angels of Darkness. That starts at the end of the Pacina campaign. And so it's like, oh well, actually, because I know these events and I know these quite well, it's quite an exciting balance. So I wrote Storm of Vengeance, and for sort of tie-in for that series. And then later on, when there was a Dark Angels novel being released for 7th edition 40k, that long ago now, was it? And they said, oh, actually, there's a new Dark Angels that's coming out. Would you like to write the first in a trilogy that'll come out alongside that? It made sense to go back and dust off those storylines and go, well, actually, I never intended to go back. There was no sequel intended for Angels of Darkness, but wouldn't it be cool to see what happened when his message comes back? What's the kind of... And so that ended up becoming the Legacy of Caliban. And by that point, I was writing in the Horus Heresy about Dark Angels. So there was like being able to seed breadcrumbs on both sides about stuff that's connected together. And then suddenly you have this. So, and all of it's there. And I'm happy to, sort of like, particularly the authors and stuff, chat to people about what the plan was. And again, the bit in the middle was never decided about exactly what happened and this, that, and the other. But just as both Heresy and 40k kind of get towards it, the connective tissue kind of grows, and there's more hints and clues and stuff like that. But certainly as a Black Library author, for example, I never get to go, I'm just going to decide to reveal the truth about who Cypher is.
I was just going to say, is it Zarael? It's not Zarael.
Well, but that's a hint, and that's one of the things. That suddenly, people had some theories, and then I wrote Age of Caliban, and suddenly there's another theory in there because at that time, he's the one who's the title. And if we ever get to a position where that's answered, going back to the other thing, is like, well, I think there's a trick been lost there. There's never through the legacy of Caliban stuff and the third one, The Unforgiven, again, there's lots of hints and little kind of nods towards certain answers or what they might be, but again, it never says, "Aha, I've solved this problem." I've kind of squared the circle, and you don't have to worry about it anymore because that's just.
But see, Cypher had a big part to play in what were the name of they were the campaign books that hit in before 8th edition kicked in.
The Gathering Storm.
Yeah, so he had a big play, and then he, and
then disappeared.
And then disappeared. So it's like it was kind of annoying because I was like, "Oh, we're going to see who Cypher is," and then
I think that's the problem, that you have to be a bit careful with some of this stuff. And it's the same, and I've done similar with bits of background and campaigns and stuff where you kind of overpromise but you can never deliver because of those things of like, we're gonna tease you and you're gonna find out about what he's going to meet this and the line's going to be released or whatever it might be, and it's like, well, no, because that's never going to happen, well, as far as no, boo-hoo to a point, but it's like, also you go, well, if you enjoy all this discussion about Cypher and stuff like that, why would you not let the people who start playing the game in 10 years from now enjoy the same discussion?
Yeah, it's very true.
And as much as it seems repetitive to us, because that's the other thing that loads of fans don't understand, of course, because particularly when they're rooted in the thing, is they always imagine that everyone knows exactly what they know. For as long as they've known it, and they've got all. No, there's people today. People picked up their first Dark Angels miniatures today, or their first book or novel or 40k or whatever this very day, and they're learning it for the first time, like we did all those years ago.
But there's also
and it's all cool and exciting, no matter what. Then why rob them of the same journeys that we could enjoy with these games and backgrounds that
There's also the people that played when they were younger and came back.
Yeah, well, there's quite a lot of that. Yeah.
Because I had that when I was sort of in my late teens playing Dark Angels, and then I rediscovered about 10 years ago, and so there was all that in the between you had to try and fill in. Yes. Where you were learning about what they'd done when you weren't looking.
Yeah, well, the thing was that was relatively straightforward until quite recently, because there was because there were things added and stuff like that. But anyone who maybe are rejoining the game, maybe finished playing in say 2005 and is rejoining now, and suddenly it's like, sorry, they what, the who, the what, the how, the what blew up, especially since I didn't we just do this in the Terror campaign? But anyway, hang on. Oh, so they finally followed through 15 years later.
And squats are technically back.
Oh yeah, well they were never gone.
Yeah.
They were just hiding low with shades on and changing their name.
Do you think they'll ever? Because I if they brought squats out again, I would throw all my money at them. I would give them everything. I would sell my house. Yeah, but it seems mad to me that they would never. I know there's the running joke with squats. It's always the running joke with them and stuff. But now that you've got two Forge World miniatures that are squats, it's just like, I personally think you're missing a trick by not having them come back in some way, shape, or form. Because people like me, old school sort of like rogue trader guys who grew up on squats, would throw all of our money at it. All of it.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, when I've talked about this various times. When the Tau came, when the Tau came out, the lead up to the Tau was very specific in that, because there was always a plan. There was Rick's famous 4-year plan, which was every 2 years you visit one of the core games. So it was like 40k, and then 2 years later it was Warhammer, and then 2 years later it was 40k, and then 2 years Warhammer. Just to refresh even if you didn't do much with the rules, refresh the box sets, all this kind of stuff. That was kind of pretty much the big plan that started with 4th edition Warhammer. And in those off years, this was the Christmas release, because there was always a specialist game Easter release as well. But there was always something else, every other year, and so we had Necromunda, and then that was really successful. So we had Gorkamorka, which wasn't. But there was a certain point where there was supposed to be a big box game, but sort of like Rick and others, they said, well, what if we put the resources that would normally go into a big box game into a new army for 40k? So all of that plastic and all that, which of course again at the time, that amount of plastic resource off the bat was kind of, whoa, my word, that's quite an investment. Whereas these days, it's like they just throw plastic sprues out the window for fun. I'm so jealous of the modelling and the potential and stuff that they have these days of just being able to make up so much, having fought tooth and nail to get a plastic giant, and now they've released an army of them, or even bigger, and you're like, oh, you don't know you're born. So there was a whole bunch of stuff, and it didn't necessarily have to be an army, but it could have been a 40k supplement style of city fight. So one of the things was like doing a boarding actions game, which would have like a lot of plastic, essentially like Zone Mortalis, but in plastic and all this kind of stuff. But we did a bunch of proposals for different races based on some. So Tau was one, which was kind of. Tau was based on an idea I had for a new 40k army when I was 16, and I still had with me, and I kind of still had loads of notes. Essentially, the basic concept of the 4 casts and the 5th cast. In my version, they were psychic. In the version that came out, they were obviously not psychic, but they had other control things. But then we had the Necrons. They were a raiding force. They'd been released as a raiding force in White Dwarf, but it's like making up a full army. There were the Catan, which were these. So the Necrons were like the ancient Terminator, Chaos Android-y, what the Necrons were. And then we had the Catan, which were the opposite. They're more like an Ultron style, super sophisticated, super robots type thing. We hadn't really. This was much more mood board and kind of a few cool lines and stuff like that. It wasn't any really developed background. It was more imagery based because Miniatures Company. And stuff like that. So that was the idea behind, and that was just based on the single line from the old Codex Imperialis of the quiescent perils of the Catan that lie beyond the gates of Val. One line, and we're like, okay, what is the quiescent perils of the Catan? Cool. So that was another thing. The Kroot were going to be an army. It was going to be a mercenary army. So again, this idea of because again the Kroot appeared in 3rd edition 40k on a little. There's like Dave Gallagher did these little sketches of aliens, and there was like a space cave, and then there was like an amble or whatever, and stuff. And then one there was like just this. It looked more like Groot, to be honest. Funnily enough, and I suspect the names came from Alan Merritt, who's a very big Marvel fan, and it was called a Kroot. Back here, but we don't. Now they're more bird-like. We just assume it's sort of like the way they talk is Kroot. So there was a proposal for turning the Kroot, and then there was an army called the Demiurge, who were basically a new take on the Squats. Yeah, and Jez had come up with ideas of asteroid miners and all kinds of cool concepts stuff like that. So, and funnily enough, of all the bits, the Demiurge kind of made it into Battlefleet Gothic for the Tau later on. But of all those races that we proposed, all of them got used apart from the Demiurge in one way or another, because the crew ended up.
Oh, it's frozen up again. Oh no, come on guys.
We did all this, and then Games Workshop picked up the Lord of the Rings license and did Fellowship of the Ring as a big game for that Christmas. But anyway, so they ended up doing a big game and a new army as well. So yeah, and but there's a fine. So the squats, it's like it can be done, and I think there's big questions about is there a finite number of armies that a range can sustain, which it may well be, but that doesn't mean that necessarily you can't bring out a new army and slightly basically semi-retire an old army. But then which one do you know? So that you could backfoot maybe the Adeptus Mechanicus and bring out the squats, and so the idea was that maybe you'd have a core of maybe 8 or 9 armies, and then 3 or 4 other armies that kind of aren't as massive in terms of physically number of miniatures in the range and stuff, but also are kind of slightly more peripheral in the background sense. So that was kind of one of the things we always played around with, and then maybe they could do things that way or not, So 5 years ago, I probably said no, you probably won't see squats. These days, you might do, but there's like the Dune Stealer Colts. What's old is new again. It's
yeah.
Nostalgia ain't not what it used to be, and all the rest of it. So something of that scale potentially, where you're not looking at 20 box sets and a range of that size, but maybe 3 character types, a couple of cool vehicles, and 3 or 4 squads. it sounds insane to say. We go, well, that's perfectly manageable for Games Workshop these days. You know, but it comes from the miniature side. You know, it's like if they've got the design desire and a need, you know, and they see where that fits in, and they could make these cool models and all the rest of it, and somebody wants to push that through on the miniatures design side, and then it gels in with all the other kind of sales stuff, then it would happen. But it's, you know, they're fighting with every other cool idea out there for the same resources and things. So, but it can be done. It can be put. You know, things can be made to work. You know, the Eldar needs lots of love. I feel as an Eldar fan, there, you know, and things like that. But then, you know, the Sisters of Battle are getting the big shot in the arm. They're kind of being pushed up to the big leagues now, and that kind of stuff. So it's always slightly changing. You know, but it's never quite as simple as just like, well, make more models, because you're like, there are real world consequences about how big stores are and how big a range is, and how, you know, how does that cannibalize other sales and all other kind of boring stuff that has to be borne in mind, unfortunately.
I waited years for Death Watch, and it was always just around the corner.
Well, you see, because I mean, I've got Death Watch. Death Watch was something. So when I wrote Inquisitor in 2000, and the idea behind that was to delve into all these different ideas that weren't suitable for the 40k battlefield. But they were that was the whole thing. Is like they were individual miniatures, and so Death Watch. You know, the whole thing about Death Watch was like, well, if you had a squad of them, if you had a kill team of Death Watch, was an extraordinary thing. You know, it was never intended to be an army. That's what made it different from like Grey Knights, you know, and the Sisters of Battle. It was, they operated again at a different level. There was a very exceptionally specialist that you might get a Death Watch Space Marine attached to your army, or maybe a whole squad, which, you know, and then that kind of, you know, the thing is the commercial imperative to turn that into an army for 40k and sell more is that, and it doesn't change the idea, and it's not. I don't think it's devalued it and stuff, but it's not what it was invented for in the same kind of way, and that has consequences on its background and the way they're portrayed in the game and all that kind of stuff. So.
I always thought it would be something like Imperial Agents, where you could have like a squad of Death Watch and an assassin and sort of on the side of a crusade, and then you get the whole codex, and you're like, cool, now where do I start?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, and again, it's about, you know, again, shifting perspectives and stuff like that, you know, of portraying how the Inquisition works in 40k. And so you've got this thing where, right, suddenly the Death Watch are like an army, and so the Inquisition can call on, the Inquisition can call on any army they want. They're the Inquisition. That's how it works. They don't need their own army. They can have specialists and things that they can deploy to other people. All right, we'll send some Death Watch over to them because we'll you know, we can command them to go over and assist them. But actually, if they want an army of Space Marines, they rock up to a Space Marine homeworld and say, "Can you help us, please?" And then Space Marines may either say yes or no. If they want, you know, 20 Imperial Guard regiments, they say, "Raise us 20 Imperial Guard regiments." You know, they don't. The Inquisition very deliberately does not need its own forces. You know, because of the way it operates and its position within the universe is to use everybody else's. You know, and you know, with that little sigil, we'll just go to a governor and go, "Your world is mine now for the time I need it." So. And so bits of that get changed, you know, as the game changes.
I always thought the Death Watch was kind of like all the different chapters coming to an agreement that there is such a pain in the ass having these Inquisitors turning up and just saying, "I want to borrow that company." They figure if we make a little bit of investment each, maybe they'll leave us alone and we can pick our own fights.
that was pretty much it, really. This idea of the under ancient oath. It's like, yeah, fine, we'll just send. Like, you won't have to keep asking us. We'll send you 5 guys every century. And then you send it back, and we'll send you over 5 guys. Providing, you know, however many come back. And so this idea of the standing agreement as an inquisitorial force, because I suppose that's the thing as well, is people can't help but start thinking just terms of modern command structures and how things work, and you go, well, no, I mean, within certain militaries in the Imperium that may work, you know, within a chapter or an Imperial Guard regiment or things like that. But actually, the reality is between these things, there's no organisation whatsoever. You've got the Departamento Munitorium that's kind of responsible, supposedly, for kind of managing a lot of this stuff, and particularly imperial organizations. But you know, remember that the Adeptus Astartes is kind of like more of an ally of the Imperium than the foot soldiers. You know, they turn up when they want to, but they've got these ancient, you know, it's like, oh, somebody's invaded Poland, we need to respond, rather than, you know, well, actually, somebody issues a command on Terra, and suddenly 10 Space Marine legions have to answer, sort of thing. And I think that's what's great about it, actually, is because people think it should work somehow. They go, oh yes, but well, why is there this breaking ranks? There needs to be somewhere in here, and how does it? And you go, no, it doesn't work, because that's not how. Because again, it's not based on a efficient model of military perfection and professional soldiery that most Western militaries are these days. It's based on individual companies and regiments raised on an ad hoc basis from a 1,000 different worlds at any given moment and thrown together in a war zone just to stop the green aliens rampaging. And so it works despite itself, not because of. I think in the same way that old armies used to do.
People forget that they're fanatics, essentially, especially the Space Marines, but even down to your Imperial Guard regiments. It's essentially a religious crusade against everything that's different. And in the case of the Space Marines, it is, okay, we're going to pump them full of weird and wonderful things, turn them into hyper-masculine killing machines, and then we're going to fill their head full of righteous rage and say, kill that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't kill that this time, kill that this time.
What epitomizes, I can't even remember, I think it might, I can't remember the book. It's a Horus Heresy book. It's basically space wolves, and they're helping a planet that has been ravaged by Dark Eldar, and I can't remember the name of it. It's going to annoy me now. But
is that? I can't remember if that one is Howl of the Hearthworld.
Yeah, maybe.
Story.
So basically, I
can't remember if it's that one or if there's another one.
It's basically because at the very end of it, no spoiler, right? It was written ages ago, but spoiler alert, he sort of, they help the local sort of humans on the planet sort of get rid of the bad guys, and he turns around, he says, oh, cheers to the Space Wolves. He says, like, we want independence. We don't want to be a part of the Empire. We don't want to be a part of the Imperium. And the Space Wolf just kills him. And it's just like, wow. Yeah. And that's like the entire thing where they're basically dying and helping these guys out. And at the very end, he's like, but we don't want to be a part of the Imperium. And he's went tough and he kills him. And it's just like, wow. And that just shows you like that's it. Just they have that one drive and that's it. And I was just like, that blew me away. I loved it. I thought it was so good.
I did for 3rd edition 40k, one of the bits in the back of it is an Inquisitor's report, sort of like post-action report, when the White Consuls respond to requests for aid of rebellion on a particular world. And so they just turn up and basically destroy all the defences. So wipe out all the orbital defences, take out all of the ground defences, decapitate the leadership, kill everybody, and then go again. And just leave the world defenseless. So the Inquisitor's like, this wasn't very useful. It's like, because if an orcs had just turned up, whatever, the world was complete. But the Space Marines is like, right. So it was the subtext being, be careful what you ask the Space Marines to do for you, sort of thing, because they will do it. But there's things they don't do. They don't rebuild your world afterwards. That's not what they're for. Well, they're too busy for a start.
Well, it's like there's the comics then with obviously the Heresy wolves, but you got Emperor's.
I think you finished again.
Oh god damn it!
He does this. You get used to it.
It's my OBS is kicking on.
Time and space.
Yeah. Sorry, am I back? Am I back?
Yes, you are.
Sorry, my OBS, it just plays up now and again. So apologies for people if it's been zoning out now and again. It just does this. It's annoying. But I could hear you talking, so it's definitely OBS this time. But yeah, sorry. There's in Emperor's Gift, I think, we're basically Space Wolves versus Grey Knights. And they basically fight the Grey Knights over the fact that the Grey Knights wanted to destroy the Armageddon. And they were like,
yes, that's right.
And they're like, well, you can't do that because they fought beside us. And there's a war fought effectively between two Space Marine legions, or chapters even, over, human beings, which is obviously the juxtaposed to what that I just said about, they don't care. They will just do what they're told.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, well, I think that's the thing is you can have this position, and people, the ultimate answer when anyone asks any particular question about Space Marines, the first answer is always, it depends on the chapter, because it doesn't have these chapter cults and very different kind of moral issues and viewpoints and stuff like that. But actually, in a similar situation, the Space Wolves kind of got away with that because they were a first founding chapter, an immense political power just by that dint of their name. Whereas later on, again, somebody dealt with a little bit by Aaron again later on. You had the Celestial Lions in the Third War for Armageddon, who kind of got into a similar situation and got on the wrong side of the Inquisition, and the Inquisition screwed them, basically. And now they're almost wiped out. So that and for me that's kind of the essence of 40k, and also the essence of the Space Marines. They're this thing aside from, they're not hardwired into the rest of the Imperium. They're this thing that operates alongside it. They're they're like the Adeptus Mechanicus again. People have to remember there's actually two allied empires. One is the Adeptus Mechanicus and one is the Imperium that happen to have this common goal. But where there's fractures and individual kind of agendas and stuff like that, that's sometimes an alliance of convenience that doesn't hold. All of which also is kind of justification for your army can fight any other army. That's not, it's like there's not always just simulations and stuff like that. You go, no, there are occurrences when the Blood Angels have fought the Ultramarines because they had an honor fight, or they fell out, or whatever. This company turned up at the wrong time.
Or Blood Angels fought with Necrons to fight Tyranids.
Well, I think so. Again, that's one of those that this is where you have to be careful about internet memes of background and how something portrayed in long form makes more sense than it was just like we're cool bro friends, fist bump, let's go. There was, it was the two forces at a very particular moment in time did a thing, and actually the existence of it almost highlights how rare it is, if you see what I mean. So there was because that's one of those kind of decisions, I suppose, as a writer. People sort of say, you have to find different ways to threaten Space Marines in a sense, and the best way to do that is to challenge their beliefs and their worldview, not their physical being, because they're not afraid. The toughest guys on the block and stuff like that. So something like, we either lose the battle and lose the world, or we have to ally with the Necrons, which again is against everything our tenants believe in. Which it's like choosing. But 40k is built on impossible decisions like that, and so to create a situation like that for the Space Marines is actually is at the heart of it. But of course, there's different ways you can portray stuff through the background, and particularly the style of background in the Codex. Whereas you go, well, actually, if that was something that occurred in a novel and there had been lots of build up to it and you understood the characters involved and all the rest of it, then it would feel like a cool finale, or or end of second act or whatever. Whereas actually, obviously, sometimes it stands out because it's one paragraph in a lot of paragraphs in a codex that makes it seem normal as opposed to remarkable because it hasn't had the build up, I suppose.
Because there was one they left sort of hovering as a plot device hanging in the corner that they diverted an Orc War, didn't they, to head off a Tyranid fleet?
Yeah, that was good.
And they had to hover around the edges, being quite scared as to what was going to happen when one of them won.
Yes, that was it. That was definitely
they both evolve and get bigger and scarier.
We're going to kick this can really far along the road, and then it's probably going to circle around and hit us. But for now,
moving back to the fantasy battle. Are you glad to see that they're looking into bringing back the old world?
Well, yeah, in a sense. I mean, I have to see what opportunities there are to write in it, really.
Yeah. Do you think it will be based on the old, the actual old world? So it'll be sort of prequel type stuff, or?
I don't know. My ill-informed supposition would be that it seems to be. I mean, I don't. There may be. I suppose there's a subtlety of difference, and I'm not quite sure. Is it the old world pre sort of storm of chaos, everything going bang, end times, or is it because there is a period, there is a at the end of the end times, that's actually a sort of a substantial period of time left to explore, and lots of interesting things happening, which got covered in very short order in the extant background, and then it all went pop. So it's like, well, it depends how far back they wind the clock. Is it so? And which depends on what their aim is for the game. I can't necessarily answer that question because I don't know. that's not the question that's being asked. There's a miniatures range in the game being designed for a particular reason within Games Workshop, and I don't know the what things they're supposed to address as to, is it to make use, is it to be a very distinct miniatures range of its own kind, in which case like an End Times Warhammer place, which actually, fundamentally, just with my Warhammer Loremaster commercial hat on, you go, well, if it's just like from before the end times, and is it a vehicle for people to use their old armies, but with a sprinkling of new models and things like that, you go, well, okay, is there that much money in there? I'm not quite sure. Or is it actually, because a lot of the more portable bits of Warhammer are now actually ending up in Age of Sigmar with the Cities of Sigmar and all this kind of stuff. And I think, that in some ways that horse is long bolted now. It's like people aren't going to come necessarily, if they've been kind of disappointed over the last 4 years of Age of Sigmar or whatever, they're not necessarily going to come back now. So is it a case of creating this, using the Warhammer to create another sort of IP place that Forge World can explore, a la like Adeptus Titanicus and Blood Bowl? That size of a kind of range and commitment is something slightly different. So depending on which of those things they want to do will shape the version of the background they portray. But as far as I'm aware, it's Warhammer. I mean, it's not a different part of it. I mean, they could do something completely crazy and do Warhammer Time of Three Emperors or Warhammer. I always thought it'd be, if they wanted to kind of do some cool stuff but have playing room, and having Warhammer Great War Against Chaos, so rather than the End Times, but the Magnus the Pious and the Great War Against Chaos at the end of the Time of Three Emperors and all kinds of other stuff. You go, lots of interesting things you can do there, and it's all kind of wide open for adding stuff in, and you're not bogged down with all the baggage of the End Times and the stuff that came here. You're not on a deadline necessarily. Because again, you might be portraying in the same way that Adeptus Titanicus was kind of remodeled to portray a very particular slice of the Horus Heresy. I could see a specialist games Warhammer Fantasy Battle background which does the same thing and takes a particular slice of the Warhammer world at a particular time or a particular place and explores that in depth rather than breadth. I think that's one of the things as well, is the main ranges are very broad, but actually Forge World and Black Library are very good at delving down into depth, whether that be the Adeptus Mechanicus or the Horus Heresy, or obviously Forge World just love tanks, so tanks all the way down, and other things.
What was the?
So yeah, I don't know. It's
what was the?
You want to see, really.
What was the there was I love Epic. Epic was I really loved Epic, so I'm kind of hoping Adeptus Titanicus will turn into Epic eventually at some point in time. Sorry,
Epic Hordes.
Yeah, but there was a fantasy battle version of Epic. I can't even remember the name. What was it called? Warmaster. Do you think they could go along that line with it? They could sort of, effectively Epic, and it would be the equivalent of the Titanicus, but for fantasy battle. They could go along that line.
In theory, I don't think that's what they're planning with some of the stuff. The kind of like the little sketches they've showed of some like Kislevite and stuff. That's all far too detailed for like 10 mil and stuff like that. So I think that's possible, but I don't think. I mean, Warmaster was an interesting one because that was like Rick's little, I hesitate to say pet project because it was quite popular and quite a good game and stuff, but that was very much what kind of scale of historical games and stuff haven't we applied to Warhammer yet, and the idea of doing this 10 mil game. So funnily enough, talking about squats, I still think squats worked best in Epic.
Yeah.
With the big guns and the Overlord Armored Airship and the Lantern, because you could do them properly. Now, of course, 40k's changed, so you're actually doing some big chunky war machines. They're not completely alien to the 40k table now, let's be honest.
Yeah. Armageddon is basically, or Apocalypse is basically the Epic rule set scaled up now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now that it's a separate thing. Yeah. Like, I giggled an awful lot when I first started going through that.
Yeah.
I just don't. For me, growing up, Warhammer, it was scale. It was epic. It was big battles and things, and I just couldn't get as much as I loved. I love the miniatures and things, like I couldn't get my head around the fact that when you played a game, you were using a squad, 2 squads, 3 squads, and I was like, but But in all the books I read and stuff, there's hundreds of them. That there's entire legions crashing against each other. There's massive war machines, and I'm not getting to do this. And even now in 9th edition, you've got 2,000 points doesn't get you very much. And I just was, why can't we just have something that's a bit more thematic, something that is epic? Literally encapsulates that word instead of having this is an epic battle with 10 guys. And I'm like, it's not really epic, is it?
Yeah, I don't think. Interestingly, I mean, it wasn't the most popular version, but one of the most interesting things we did when we did Epic 40,000, other than putting things on strip bases rather than square, was we tried, when Jervis and Andy Chambers started designing it, they took 40k battle reports and kind of scaled them down, kind of like before that one. Not Epic Armageddon, Epic 40,000.
Yeah.
That's the one that came, had a John Blanche cover, I think. And the idea was that a detachment could be a 40k army. Now, you ended up specialising, really. But that for the first time, actually, it contextualised the 40k battle, because you could imagine that army was your 40k game, and as you're playing 40k, there are 20 other games happening either side of it. So that's your epic battle. And of course, it changed since then and stuff. But I think that's always been there's always been a couple of things about the GW games. One of which is there's never been any kind of stated figure scale or ground scale about this guy equals 20 guys on the battlefield, and whether it's like if you're doing like the 100 Years' War and all that kind of stuff that historical gamers really get vexed about. It was always game first, and a number of models in a unit essentially as wound counters, but also potentially the idea why you had special characters and quite powerful things in a small space was like this was potentially the hinge point of a much larger battle that you're fighting, or the scenario contextualized it in some other way. So I don't think we get necessarily that sense of that now. I think, like you say, 40k tries to be the epic battle on a small table with models that are too big, a bit too much, but then it sort of changes it slightly with stratagems and the way stuff kind of sequences and the size of certain models and things kind of gets around that, I suppose. So lots of stuff kind of dealt with through rules, I suppose, rather than miniatures. In miniatures, certain things would, like your Death Strike. Well, Death Strikes in 40k now as well, obviously, but you can fire them at the next GW store. But to phone them up and say, "He's playing 40k. Does that a vortex missile land in the middle?"
Someone did that.
We did that. Well, that was on one of when we started the Apocalypse Battle Report. I think we had a big battle on one thing, and then we had another battle with a battery of basilisks on another in Warhammer World, and they could fire onto our table, basically, because there was literally off-table support, but there was an attack on the off-table support, which I love. I think big multi-table battles and stuff like that, again, was what in fact, actually, it wasn't even Apocalypse. It was kind of proto-Apocalypse. I think you're right. It was Armageddon campaign. We did a similar sort of thing. They're like, I think it was like Storm Boys and stuff attacking the basilisks. There was another great one, which was, I think there was was it the Necrons versus Sisters or something like that, where there was a fight above ground, and then there was a fight in the Toomplex complex underneath, which was like a kill team sort of fight and a 40k fight, I think. But again, you want to go up to that epic. You want to do the next one up, Battlefleet Gothic. That was always the dream. Never did it. That completely top-down campaign where you fight the Battlefleet Gothic game, and then you get orbital supremacy, and you do your drop zone commander, does this sort of thing. But the idea, and then you could fight the epic battle, which is and then once you get possession of the buildings or whatever, then you fight the 40k battle. I don't think you could necessarily get to the then you fight the kill team, but you could do you could. I think 40k handles that, scales down to the big fight between the guys at the end or whatever. And obviously, and then you'd have this big map on the wall somewhere where you'd feel very much like a commander in 40k, where you just go, there's massive battles and stuff, and you just and just do a little. I'd love it.
I that's literally my dream. Something that big. Yeah, I'd love something like that.
Because there was one of the independents that did. They had sci-fi war game. They had a space war game, and I remember going back about 4 or 5 years ago. They folded. I think they got bought by one of the others, but they had this thing where actually were demonstrating a thing. What I'm saying, they had a table which was running a Space War game.
Yeah.
They had a table that was running their skirmish scale 28 mil board game, and then using the same files, they'd skipped it down and they'd printed in 10 mil, so you could play an epic type game, and then zoom it through. And I don't think they ever pulled it off. I think they overran their sort of their dreams overran their cash flow, and they ended up having to sell up. But they actually had that running, and it was so cool because you just had these sort of like 50-year-old beardy wargamers just sitting there like they didn't know where to look, and they looked like they were going to collapse out of like sheer happiness and delirium, trying to figure out where to focus first.
I think one of the issues, because everyone would love to do that, and unfortunately the commercial reality it hits is nobody has the time to, short of when we all get to retire in our air bubbles in 20 years time, and we're playing virtually. I don't know. So but that's been, like those kind of campaigns have been what I've always wanted to do since I got into kind of wargaming and stuff like that. I refight the battles for North Africa, and reading too many kind of books by Donald Featherstone and stuff. But and the same with 40k. In fact, I found the other day, and I don't know why I've still got it. I've got a massive piece of paper that's got an old epic campaign map on it, which was essentially a load of kind of like it's got all the trainer stuff drawn on it. Essentially, a bunch of 4x8 or 4x6 tables in a grid and stuff like that, and roads between them and all that kind of stuff. I must have done when I was about 17, I guess.
Wow.
That I've just, unfortunately, I don't have the epic orc army that I had then, but I've still got this. I've got this piece of paper for some reason. I know I'd rather swap, and I'd still have my epic orc army. I got into 40k through Epic. Basically, it was the first game I played the most. Adeptus Titanicus was my real first taste of 40k. So
I don't know if it was for Epic 40,000 the one before, because I came in with Space Marines.
Yes, Space Marines.
And I bought Hive War, and started. I had like five Bio Titans and the Hive Queen and all that sort of thing, and Harridans and stuff, and I missed that a little bit.
I know, absolutely. I love it. I think there's still quite a strong net epic following and stuff. Again, obviously not particularly many events and stuff, but that's one that's kind of ongoing, and that's the same as it's that it's just a second edition Space Marine, I think, was the peak for a lot of us that grew up with Epic. And as much as I love Epic Armageddon and I love Epic 40,000, and the thing is the games are slightly different enough that they're all viable takes on an Epic game system, and each acts in a slightly different way. But I can't fight the nostalgia of putting down those little order counters and and Gargants acting like battleships, with like all ahead full and turn right, and having riggers fighting fires and all that kind of stuff. I had a Gargant big mob. I had 6 great Gargants and like 4 slasher Gargants and Cult of Speed and all kind. I had a big orc army. That was and painted and complete more than any Warhammer or 40k army had.
Oh god, yeah. But Epic was so easy to paint, wasn't it? It was.
Yeah.
Dab.
I think Epic was the first time, like in Northern Ireland, we didn't have a Games Workshop for ages, and so I remember my father came back with you could buy Games Workshop stuff in Virgin mega stores. Oh, I've gone out red again, haven't we? Sorry, back again.
Back to his kids.
Sorry, technology is killing me today. It really is. Just like everything is literally just fighting against me. As I was saying, my father sort of brought back. We didn't have Games Workshop in Northern Ireland, so Virgin Megastore sold Games Workshop stuff and Citadel type stuff. So my dad got me back some like Space Marines, and I got Rogue Trader as well. My first Warhammer book was Rogue Trader, but my first sort of experience of a Games Workshop was when I was in Oxford at my grandparents', and my dad said, "Do you want something?" And I saw the Space Marine box, and I went, "I want that." And the Space Marine box was the first thing that I got from a Games Workshop, and I loved it. And I have always, from that point on, I was like, "This is how these battles should be," and I loved it. And I'm gutted that they just don't do it anymore, because
I must admit, I prefer like the absolute opposite of that. I prefer like the skamish games, like literally it's like 5 Space Marines against 5 Space Marines, and literally that kind of Yeah, basically killed it. I mean, like back in the years ago, far longer than I care to remember. One of my favorite games was literally 5 Space Marines and 5 Space Marines in a battle, completely balanced team, and we having to come up with tactics where we could take out the other guy without exposing ourselves.
Because that is
Funny,
a thing now.
yeah. Funny,
So-
well, funny. I was going to say my very first game of 40k at my mate Richard's house, and we had Road Trader, and we had basically our first game was we had a hill, and we had a Space Marine captain each, and basically we spent the entire game running around the hill, throwing grenades indirectly at each
Exactly, yes.
That was it. And he went, oh, that was 40. I mean, we'd done some war gaming and stuff before that. I remember having tank battles, Panzer IVs versus Shermans up and down these stairs and stuff. But yeah, so that was our first experience of 40k. It was like, yeah, that was different. It was like, we painted Space Marines on the polystyrene hill.
Dear. Those are the days.
Oh man,
No, 'cause now
Jumpers.
we have Kill Team for that,
Yeah.
and then you have your Armageddon, which is basically epic but with 28mm vehicles, and then you have 40k in the middle, which can't decide quite what it wants to be, but it gives you a huge amount of toys.
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
it wants
I
to be is annoying, and it keeps on nerfing space rules, and it's annoying me.
I don't know. As a newbie at Space Wolves for 9th edition, I'm quite enjoying them at the moment. I kind of inadvertently creamed an awful lot of Eldar yesterday morning.
So Gav, I have to ask, what are you playing at the moment? Like, no, lockdown and everything permitting. Like, what are
Yeah,
your
so
games of choice?
Right. Well, so what was I doing? Well, just before lockdown, and what I'd really like to get back to is playing Depths of Titanicus and Warcry, actually. Really enjoyed Warcry. I had a game, I had an evening playing it. We had got about 4 games in with Guy Haley in Bugman's. And I've painted all my stuff now and all the rest. It's great. And the Depths of Titanicus, for all the reasons we're talking about, again, I grew up with, my formative years with, the one of the first boxes I bought was the 6 Battle Titans in a box.
Yeah.
And halved it with my mate. We had 3 Titans each, and Nemesis class Warbringers, and all kinds of other stuff. And so like the new version, hits all the models are really nice to put together. And although I drove myself insane painting them because I decided to be went for Legio Praesagius, who've got blue and white, and painting white is just a nightmare. And I keep putting together my Reavers, so I've killed 2 Reavers so far. I don't know, because I keep trying to pose them and then gluing them and then they don't fit. But playing the game hits all the right, the power management and all that kind of stuff. The Adeptus, and again the scale of it is right. And I think you have just about the same. You have 3 or 4 Titans, depending on what they are. Maybe a few Knights is kind of cool. I like that, and that's nice and manageable. And similarly. So that's kind of like for Games Workshop. Although I keep forgetting when people ask about hobby stuff, I'm actually collecting the Mortal Realms part work with my son Sammy. So he's putting together all the Stormcast, and I'm doing the ghosts basically. So I am actually gradually collecting spirit, kind of like an undead ghosts army for Age of Sigmar. Sort of like every few weeks as we're a bit behind now, but I think I'm not in any rush. And then terrain stuff, and it's one of those I looked at and go, as value for money goes, it's probably not the best value for money, but actually it's paced and we get all the background, and he enjoys, he gets something it's actually addressed to him through the post, and he likes, all of that sort of stuff. So it's great fun. It's a real sharing moment, and actually I am gradually collecting an army as well. So I would like to play some games with them at some point as well. It would be nice. And then I've been doing a bit of role playing actually. That's which is one of the things available, over Discord. Basically, I had a role playing group which was a Games Workshop based one actually, with a few people at Games Workshop, and then we all variously left and stuff. So it finished our last campaigns finished about 10 years ago. And I've not really done any role playing since. And I had a real hankering at the start of this year, sort of like end of last year. There's lots of cool role playing games coming out, and I've got some from Kickstarter, and lots of good things happening in the role playing community. And so I was like, oh yeah, let's get the band back together, kind of stuff. And it's sort of, we're all still, well, most of us are still kind of based around Nottingham stuff, but all over the place. So finding a physical venue was proving a bit problematic, one that wasn't going to cost us loads and stuff like that. And then funnily enough, weirdly enough, this coronavirus hit, and it was all lockdown stuff, so we were forced to go online. and that actually helped us basically get our act together, because like, well, I don't have to worry about that now. We'll just try and do it over Discord, and I'll put maps up on D20 and we'll do a thing. So I'm doing a Judge Dredd, the new Judge Dredd and Worlds of 2000 AD game, which was fun. We've done the intro scenario shootout kind of stuff, and we're getting into proper investigation and stuff now. And there's a few things I'm tweaking and kind of thinking about doing with it as we go, but it's more about the, for me, 2000 AD is on the same level as 40k, as in influences and things that are there in my because pre-teen and teen years is just stuff that filtered into my brain. So playing Judge Dredd is kind of fun, but I've got the original Judge Dredd kind of like role-playing game and stuff as well. So there's that, and I'm going to be starting another group soonish as well, for a role-playing game called Heart, by Rowan Rook and Deckard, which is an amazing game. Just crazy, very much more storytelling and stuff like that. But just if people like 40k and weirdness and stuff, it's very body horror. And anyway, so that was a Kickstarter, which we're trying to run over Discord again soon, hopefully. But lots of people have been taking the opportunity to paint stuff, and I suppose I have a bit. I've been painting up a bunch of non-GW dwarfs of various manufacturers and Kickstarters and other things for a view of just doing like having a force of dwarfs for something like Dragon Rampant or the Saga Age of Magic and stuff like that. Just like non-Hammer systems, just like cool dwarf models, and I don't have to worry. System agnostic stuff. I'll just paint them, and I love dwarfs models. And so I've been adding to that, revisiting them. And then there's another game which I really like, if you like skirmish games, but which I sing the praises of, which is called Twilight World of Anaril, Aniral, not quite sure how you pronounce it, which is affectionately known as Battle Fraggles. Done by a guy called Michael Thorpe. And he's been doing them for years, and he doesn't go to shows and stuff. He just goes to Salute, and he's run a few Kickstarters and stuff. But basically, there's no humans in this world. They're all these sort of strange creatures, like quite Jim Henson-esque, Dark Crystal kind of slightly inspired creatures and stuff. And skirmish game is very scenario based, very narrative. A few models on each side. It doesn't use dice. It has these little interesting kind of like basically combat stones and stuff. So you draw stuff out of a bag, and you kind of throw these stones, and depending on which side up they are, size combat and stuff. So it's quite different to anything out there. And the models are lovely to paint. They're not like super detailed, but that's kind of what I like. One of the things I've realised is I can paint more of the some of these models in the time it takes me to put together some plastics from GW. It's just that. When they're done, they're beautiful, but the process sometimes of putting together a unit for like Age of Sigmar 40k is just like, oh my word, it's like, did I really need to have a separate thumb for this piece, or whatever, because of some interesting, it's like, but the results are there. But that's one of the reasons to do some of the other painting as well, of like old kind of single piece metal castings and stuff, of just like these are actually quite relaxing to paint, and they're simple and straightforward, and I don't have to go, oh look, I've missed all those skulls around the back, or whatever it might be. So
do you find yourself being slightly over, like with the advent of Kickstarter and the fact that 3D printing and molding, sort of plastic molds for figures is a lot cheaper than it probably was back in the day, that there's a lot of games coming out now? Do you feel slightly overwhelmed by this? There's so many games. So like I personally I get little panic attacks because there's so many different systems, and you kind of want to play them all, but you can't.
I mean, I do have a Kickstarter habit. I mean, I don't just do, I do a few miniatures. I don't do a lot of miniatures through Kickstarter. I do quite a few board games, do some comics, and a couple of other bits and pieces of kind of specialist interest. And I am a super backer, apparently.
Oh no!
I've backed about 135.
I thought I was bad. I've got 52, I think. That was bad.
I mean, that's over a period of time, obviously. And like I said, some of them are just like a single comic book and stuff. They're not all like, Darker Dungeons $200 sinks. I've got a few. Cthulhu Wars was a big one I did, and Ares Games. Sails of Glory was another one of my early ones. I was like, I'm just going to go all in and get all the ships. I love Napoleonic ships. The Napoleonic ship game, yeah, just give it to me.
Take my money.
So yeah. And then it's in the cupboard up there. And no, in fact, actually, it's worse than that. It's now in the attic. Along with, it just takes up so much room. So it's like, well, if I get to use this, I'll go up there and I'll bring it down. But it's just, so I do back quite a lot of Kickstarters. But I've actually, there's two things. I don't do a lot of the big ones, especially not the big kind of miniature / board game, cool mini or not one. Just one, because I kind of got that out of my system with, like I say, a couple of the big all-in ones. Early on in my Kickstarter habit, but also, and just physically, I don't have the space for them, and I know I just won't have the time to play them. But I came just a few days ago when I was looking, it's like, I've only got 2 active Kickstarters. Wow, that's a well, blimey. I don't know when that's been that low in a long time. It's like almost having inbox 0, you know. It's not like they've all arrived. It's just actually 2 literally active at the moment, and it's like I'm kind of, I know I've got a problem in a sense, you know, and I want really cool stuff that games like say I want to play and stuff like that. But actually, what I realise is, particularly because I'm a freelancer, is like the more I spend on Kickstarter, the more I have to work to pay for my Kickstarter. The less time
I feel you, man. I feel you.
So I need to just draw a line. And the thing is, people stop making stuff good.
Yeah,
yeah.
It stresses me.
I'm stuck for amazing presentation. You
Yeah,
know, just like, and that's the thing is, you just look at it and just go, oh, that looks gorgeous. Click. Just the most insane one I love as a board game, not a miniature game, which I've backed, and I did a bit of this earlier. I think it's due to arrive next year, which is a game called Beyond Humanity Colonies. And it's a board game, and it's a colony building board game.
I've seen
You
it.
can play it like solo, cooperative, competitive. It's like a kind of build a Martian colony sort of thing, except it's not a Martian colony, it's whatever colony you want. But it's fully technologically integrated. So there's an app, but all the cards and counters and the building things and stuff have all got RFID in them.
Oh, nice.
So that when you put a card on a thing, it recognizes it and talks to the app, and it's all just insane, because even little LEDs. Yeah, so it's just not a cheap board game either. And so that's kind of crazy. Yeah, but the even crazier thing is they've got this thing on the internet, this thing called Exogen. So I've just started my corporation on this online game, which is basically exploring planets and cataloging planets and all this kind of stuff. And there's like and that'll develop and stuff. When I come to get the board game, the planets that I've explored with my probes and pioneers and stuff on that game will be available for me to colonize in the board game, which will then affect the online game.
Wow.
And it's like, and you
That
don't
sounds
have
dangerous.
to. Obviously, you don't need to. You know, it's like the online thing is an extra thing, but that's like, and you're like, and all the, you know, it's like the names that I give stuff on there will then be available in my version of the app that I have on the board. And you're like, yeah, I only need one of them games. You know, it's like, but that is only because there's only so much you can handle. But you go, well, that's next. I would say next generation kind of games design, but actually it's not, because I don't think you can do too many of those. It's just so insanely overspec'd, but also amazing.
I was at the National Video Game Museum a year or so ago, and they actually had running a 40k game, but they're using like camera with image recognition technology on this tablet, and we're basically going up to each miniature and going, right, what's that one?
That's yeah, I did a bit.
Oh, fuck my life. This OBS is really killing me today.
And go, okay, which one's that one again? Ah, right, brilliant.
Yes,
I
It's
saw
a
a
fantastic
in
thing.
one of the Facebook groups where this guy had printed QR codes with a label underneath the base of all his miniatures.
right.
And so if anyone ever asked him, what's that? He'd just say, well, have you got a mobile phone? And get them to zap it. And it would lead off to a
Yeah, I mean, this was a
description.
thing. Yeah, I mean, this was because he was, like I say, he was like doing research and not in university, and there's these two computers self-heating theories, which I kind of understand, but not quite. Which is like, because there's this idea of the Internet of Things, which is basically like you have the internet in your fridge and your kettle and all that kind of stuff, which is basically about putting chips and stuff into everything. So that would be that kind of idea. Obviously that's quite a hands-on way you can do it yourself, but the idea that miniatures have chips in them or something else, like your phone can recognize or whatever. Whereas the guy with the tablet and the display at the video game, the video arcade museum, whatever, I can't remember what they called it. Unfortunately moved to Sheffield now.
I know.
Was that actually you used like the kind of like the image recognition technology and stuff like that? Like I say, so you could point it at a battlefield.
Yeah.
And so rather than the information being in the thing, it's on the internet, but actually the interface is different. And he had loads of, he did a 3D scan of a couple of like robot models that I'd done and sent them to me and things like that. And so that was all amazing stuff. Again, this idea of being able to do, if like that mega campaign we were talking about, that idea of collating it all into one place, so that like your guy with the QR code, so you can document the wins and losses, and how many games has he died in and how many has he survived, and if he wanted to, and have it all there. And then of course the logical extension of that would be to have that as part of an army builder program, so you can just select the people and put it into an army. Of course, the logical conclusion of that would be having some kind of campaign system
Crusade
that kind of brings all that together. Yeah, well, exactly. Crusade is another great example. I think between Warcry and Crusade and stuff, DW have been doing some really interesting stuff with campaigns and making them very free flowing and open, and kind of like it's all about playing games rather than paperwork in a way. But also, but that's when you can start to connect to other people. And there's a website called World Anvil.
We use World Anvil. Yeah.
So well, I've only just started. I've just started doing a few notes for my Dread campaign and some future stuff that I might be doing. For writing stuff, but you can again imagine on a World Anvil type campaign wiki type thing that you're running, which again, rather than having to sort of like manage it too much, again that interface becomes seamless between your games. Take a snapshot at the end of the game and be able to highlight the units and who took part and stuff, and it all being recorded on this kind of cool wiki database, and you go, that'd be awesome. Also potentially hard work, but the idea is to make it less hard work as you go along.
I spend a lot of time on World Anvil. So we've got a D&D campaign we do every Thursday, right. And I've got a World Anvil. I got to the point where I've bought the unlimited one, so it goes on forever. You can get they just announced it recently where you could get it for life. You can get their subscription for life. So I went, I'm all in this, so I got that, and I spend most of my life now writing story, writing little bits of sort of like rules of engagement, and small little things like stupid things that happened in a blacksmith or that happened in a shop somewhere and stuff, and like drawing maps and stuff, so people can see where they're moving around on the map, and adding layers onto the map so you can zoom in. So that's the areas, that's the cities, that's the towns. You can zoom into the towns themselves and stuff. It's just like, it takes up so much of your life, but it's awesome. It's so good. It's so in depth. Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah, I'm just trying to I'm kind of just getting my head around it at the moment. Some of the features and things to record some stuff for this Dread campaign and the various interlocking clues and stuff like that. So I've got basically reams of handwritten notes and stuff, which are kind of cool. But actually, if I lose them, I'm screwed. So, but yeah, and of course the great thing is, of course, being a games developer and an author is actually that's my subscription is deductible.
Nice.
So that's cool. I still have to pay for it, but it's
business expenses. It's business expenses.
I do that. Absolutely, it is.
I do that all the time myself.
How to dodge your taxes, ladies and gentlemen. 101.
I'm actually
you do occasionally have to write a book. Not that.
This is why I'm avoiding World Anvil, Matt. Is I'm terrified I'll get as hooked as you are, because I'm just getting ready for NaNoWriMo, because I'm a ML as well, and I'm terrified that I'll spend more time world building than actually writing.
You do spend your life literally doing it, man. It's just like
Well, that's the interesting thing, though, because I think that's how kind of like the geek economy is kind of changing slightly. Is that if you did that, and actually there's because of the way World Anvil's set up and you can have access stuff, you could run a Patreon that gives access to your world building that other people could then use. So you can, geekery can get monetized in very many different ways these days, like talking about Kickstarters, but also Patreon and Twitch streams and all that kind of stuff, in a way that it couldn't done before. And I think that creative economy and that geek economy, so people can kind of, it's the gig economy as well, but for like, you don't necessarily have to live off your role playing streaming or your Patreon or whatever, but it's not, in some ways it's almost just justification for sharing it. You want to do world building on World Anvil and stuff. So actually the 4 guys that follow me on, back me on Patreon are the reason I do it, or whatever it might be. That sometimes they're just the excuse you need as opposed to actually.
Well, I mean, Geek is big now. I mean, 4 years ago, I was asked to write for the BBC an article about will we ever build mechs?
Yes, I remember that.
And that was just fantastic to research. And then
Robot Jocks.
Oh, what a film! What a film!
And then about a year or so later, I was writing an article: will we ever colonize asteroids based on The Expanse? And again, fantastic research.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's I mean that sort of the rise of Geek and Sundry and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. That digital sort of medium that and like I say, there's so many games. I mean, it's hard to see how sustainable. It's hard to see how sustainable some of this is at the moment. So because we've got into a very accelerated timescale for games and things like that. So and I've had conversations with various people which amount to the same things, which is because Kickstarter is actually terrible in some ways, because for me it's my way of doing impulse buying, but I have to wait 18 months for the thing.
You're buying gifts for yourself in the future. You're buying gifts for yourself.
Absolutely. But the great thing is you kind of get a notification from DPD that somebody's turning out and you go, oh, well, this is going to be. It can be any one of 6 current things that are arriving anytime soon.
What is your missus think?
Because it's drunk buying, isn't it? What is you sent a present to yourself the night before and you don't remember it until you get a guy from Amazon turns up in the morning to wake you up.
It's true, man, but it's like I just had some stuff rock up. Some what they called. They used to be called kabuki models, but they do lots of like busts and things like that. I had a massive box turn up from them, and my girlfriend's like, What's that? And I'm just like, I bought it like 2 years ago. It's a gift from 2 years back. It's only just turned up now.
That's what I think of it. Really, it's like the ghosts of full cupboard's future. As far as I can tell, it's like, because I look at it and go, I just had a big clear up recently. Not obviously never throw anything away, but it's like, no, I've moved stuff around and I've put this on. It's like, it's great, and it's like, in 6 months' time, it's all going to be. It's like you've got at least 6 more games arriving. It's like, and stuff. Terrain as well. Storing terrain's my bugbear. But
oh man, I've got so much terrain.
Terrain arriving as well. It's like
I've got more terrain than is necessary. I've got cardboard stuff, MDF stuff, plastic. I've got it all, and it's like I don't need this much terrain. I've just went, that looked cool. Like I just backed actually another Kickstarter. I just backed a Kickstarter on terrain. It's like, I don't need that terrain. I don't need it. It just looks freaking cool.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's the thing. But I think for terrain in particular, like miniatures and stuff, it's not so bad. I think where there's a danger for some people because of that delay, because of the hotness being like dominated by Kickstarters on War Game Geek and all this kind of stuff, and the way they're kind of skewing the market a bit, and certainly big name Kickstarters taking lots of the money. And I mean, I try to back small Kickstarters as well, just little indie RPG zines and all this kind of stuff, because I'm not that, for the reason we've been talking about, it's like the big stuff actually isn't necessarily that enticing anymore because I just don't have the space all the time. But actually, they're not creating communities. So if it's a one-off game, that's cool. But actually, if it's the one that comes back and people talk about is Relic Knights, which was very successful, but of course nobody plays it. It was a big Kickstarter, and then they did a second edition and stuff like that to sort stuff out. But again, the delay in stuff actually hitting you. It means everyone's into something else. Guild Ball come out, something else come out. These stuff. So they never actually, although they may have quite a lot of backers, although a lot of the big ones, you look at it and you go, oh my God, that made, $500,000. And you go, yeah, from 1,500 people, which is quite a good sales, but actually that's not very big number of people to try and build a community around across the globe, sort of thing. And certainly when even smaller companies have to have a wider fan base than that. And then, so if you can build on it, that's cool. And if you can build a community around that, but actually if they're only getting something every 18 months, or actually you don't follow through or your supplement is late or whatever, then suddenly it's gone. All of that faith and goodwill disappears, and then you're sunk. And there's a few companies that, all quiet on the Martian front and things like that were very successful Kickstarters, but actually behind the scenes costs rose and other stuff, and they end up, rather than it being Kickstarter originally being sort of like a way of offsetting your production costs for retail and things. Now retailers don't want to take Kickstarters because anyone who's interested in them has bought them a massive discount, and that's the thing, is like, lots of the big ones are like, oh yeah, we'll just throw miniatures at you because it's all the economies of scale which other people can't compete with. Absolutely. And then retailers like, I don't want to sell.
Dreadball's the one that comes to mind. Me and a couple of friends used to do at the weekends. We were doing sort of wargaming as like at the shows. We'd go to the shows, we'd buy and sell, a little bit of eBaying, and we really liked the look of Dreadball, and we bought a bunch of stuff in. The problem is no one was buying it because everybody who wanted to play Dreadball had got into the Kickstarter, and they had like 5 spare teams and the box set and the special edition miniatures and stuff. And I think we ended up, we went in for like one of the shop packs for whatever, it was like 350, 400 quid, and most of that went out of cost in the end. Yeah, because no one else wanted it.
No, absolutely. You can't, literally can't give it away almost. Yeah. Because and the flip side is, because of that, people then there's a similar thing. Obviously, people then actually get quite cold feet about jumping on board of stuff because like, oh, am I going to want to drop 200 quid on this game that nobody's going to play? Yeah. If your setup costs are that high. It's like, oh, everyone's gone back to particularly once, like 3 or 4 years ago when GW got themselves sorted out again, and basically hit the scene running with like Necromunda and Adeptus Titanicus and Blood Bowl and Age of Sigmar was getting over its teething problems, and 40k 8th hit. That was the big dogs back in town. And everyone's spending money on it, and it's like, oh right, you just released your skirt. Oh no, sorry, they've just released Necromunda. Boom. Yeah. It's like, well, there goes everybody else's money. So, and suddenly, and of course, that's kind of settled down again now. I mean, they're still going great guns and things, but actually, the recruiting side of it is pulling everything up again, hopefully, which is what wasn't happening before.
Yeah, but actually, I remember that time because that was one of the first times the Games Workshop were talking to the press.
Oh God, yeah,
man, they were so bad. But they went through a period. They didn't even have a Facebook page. They refused to talk to anybody.
Shut and then the forums, everything.
Yeah,
it was 4 years ago. But literally, just started talking to the press. I found that was a big thing. So it was a fundamental shift in their approach to publicity and community, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and just bringing out some great product. And doing the stuff and telling people about it and actually selling it rather than just expecting to buy it and stuff like that. And I think that suddenly there were probably a few companies and projects around then that probably went, oh, it's like, oh great, oh, I was just planning to do, it's like, oh well, there goes that, it's like, because nobody's going to be looking in this direction. I don't think, but I think people can then bear that in mind now. I think it's not Dreadball being a classic example. Like, let's get into Dreadball, and suddenly it's like, well, you could play proper Blood Bowl again, and they're different games and they've got different appeal and stuff like that. But if
oh my God, kicked off connection lock.
Well, that was Guild Ball.
Oh, Guild Ball, sorry.
Yeah, Guild Ball, they've deliberately wound down now.
Yeah.
Dreadball, I don't know. I mean, Dreadball's Mantic, so in theory, I think it's still going.
Oh, sorry, I mixed those two up. So that was me.
Well, exactly.
My OBS is freaking kicking off at the minute, so I think we're gonna have to wind this down at the minute. But a few questions before you go, Gav, because I think some of my friends will be really annoyed if I don't. First up, we've got a question on. There's been a few comments on socials, but Charlie McBroom says, "What companies do you feel are doing the community well these days?"
I don't know. To be honest, I'm just not in a very good position to answer that because I don't really interact with that in the same kind of way. I'm actually not that into into the community side of things. I'm not playing that many things, so I'm not exposed to that. I'm not on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, and that's the only kind of social media I do. So I'm not exposed to. I don't really watch Twitch or YouTube and stuff like that. So I'm one of those weirdos that doesn't really interact with it in much of a way. So I don't really know. I'm not.
There you go, Charlie. Straight to the point.
There's things I like and companies that are doing stuff I like, but I don't know if they're engaging with the community well enough. It's like I couldn't make any comparison between GW and Wizards of the Coast and Privateer and Mantic and stuff because I don't interact with any of them particularly in the same way. So my opinion isn't particularly valid, I'm afraid. Which is a rare thing for people to admit on the internet, I know.
One of my mates, Leonard, he used to work for Games Workshop in Manchester, but he says, what's the best way into the Black Library as a new author?
The submissions window. Frankly, when they run a submissions window,
they've got Horus submissions open at the moment, aren't they?
Yes, exactly. There's a Horus submissions window open at the moment. If you're not an already published author, basically, if you're looking, that's the best way. I mean, look at the guidelines, write a really cool story or two, and give it a go. Really, I mean. But I also caveat any of that stuff, which is like you have to decide. It's like writing for Black Library is a particular thing, and obviously fans want to do that, and that's slightly different from do you want to be a writer? And if you want to be a writer, then you can't just think about writing on one particular thing for one particular company. There are thousands of journals and publishers and things who after short stories of all kinds of different things. So if you want to be a writer, then you have to cast your net wide. If you're a fan and want to try and get a story published with Black Library, then that's the way to go. But either way, submissions window, keep an eye out for the submissions window and then submit stories, basically.
I had what was it? The last submission, not just the horror one, but the one before. I was like, I'm gonna do one. It's gonna be about the Praetorians, and after the sort of the defeat at Orc's Drift, that sort of battle, that battle report thing, and it was gonna be about a soldier, and it was gonna be, and then I was like, and then I got like 2 pages in and went, yeah, I'm not going to be able to do this. it's like, yeah, it's just
writing's easy.
Yeah, well, it's just...
he knows his writing. He does the difficult stuff. His stuff has to make sense, and he has to research it. People turn around and go, "That's not true," whereas I go, "Prove it."
This is why I talk about stuff like, "Will we ever build next?" Because then they can go. Well,
if one day you're proven wrong and they do build a mech, then it's
the fact is though that they have in Japan.
Yeah, the Gundam, the big
exactly. They built that big Gundam, and also about a couple of years ago there was this giant fight between a Japanese robot and an American robot. So I was completely proved wrong. Although it was wheeled and not on legs, so that is so I'm still standing by my article.
The Japanese Gundam one is that on like a crane, or does it actually move on its own?
I think it's not a dolly of some sort.
Yeah, it is. So it's not like
I don't know what it's intended to long term, whether that's still part of it or not.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean,
my mate Craig says, do they have a Horus Heresy authors WhatsApp group? And if so, who's the most active?
No, we do it. We because we're all of a certain age, we just do email.
Okay.
However, people may know from Warhammer community and things like that. Guy, Aaron, and myself are in a little WhatsApp group, and we also got another group with Phil Kelly in it as well, because we did the Taylor for Word Lords army collecting thing for Warhammer community. So yes, we have. There's not so much a WhatsApp group kind of chat thing. It's more. Where's this gate on the Eternity Wall again? very much. There's a lot of geography-related questions flying around as part of the Heresy group at the moment. But yeah, when we all kind of get on it, it'd be lovely to have a WhatsApp or a Slack or whatever it is we're supposed to do, but we're not that organised.
And this is a question for me. Do you think they're going to bring out an Emperor model, and how do you think they're going to stat him?
Well, I wouldn't put it past Fordwell not to release anything.
Well, they've got to do that diorama, don't they? They've got to do that diorama with him and Horus and Sanguinius dead, don't they? They've got to do a sort of vamp of that old school diorama from
the
back.
Mike McVeigh one.
Yeah.
Are they good? But I don't think they can. The interesting, the very useful bit in many ways about the particularly Siege of Terror background is that neither of those people, Horus or Emperor, actually gets involved in any fighting except versus each other, and Sanguinius obviously. So you don't need to stat them really unless you do a little mini duel game. For them to actually fight each other, because they don't.
The statting for them will just be 10 across the board.
Well, that's it. Yeah, it's like, how do you stat the Emperor? And then you get a model for him. It's like, how I don't, because Horus does have stats, but he's not a transcended Horus, is he? He's just.
I remember like years ago in Vampire the Masquerade, White Wolf, the creators of it, actually statted Cain, the progenitor of the vampires, and it basically was, you're dead. Any stat, you're dead. You're dead. Skill list, you're dead.
There was back in the old days of White Dwarf when they had other role-playing stuff and things in there, and I remember there was a review of a Middle-earth role-playing supplement, which was for for the Valar, or included some of the stats for the Valar from Silmarillion, and it said, which is just obviously insane and incredible. And then, who really wants to know that Owlie has plus 100 skiing? And it was like, okay, and that kind of sums it up. It's like, the Emperor has plus 100 skiing. That's all you need to know.
Is it sort of, you talking about that actually made me think, did Games Workshop do a history range, sort of Ancients Games Workshop, did they do
there was Warhammer Historical for a while, yes.
Yeah.
For a while. The main proponents of that were the Perry twins and Jervis Johnson, who kind of set it all up, and they got quite successful. And a guy called Rob Broom ran it for a while, and then it felt well, and then Games Workshop was running into trouble, so it decided to close anything it didn't quite understand. Which wasn't anything that wasn't directly related to their own toy soldier business, and Warhammer Historical went with that. So Warhammer Ancient Battles was quite a thing, and it was very successful, really. In fact, again, it literally started with the Perrys and Jervis mailing, because it was this little junk, so they'd send out copies of the rulebook from their garage thing. So it had like the Games Workshop stamp on it because it was Warhammer, and then there was Warhammer. There was a War Master version, so which Rick then rewrote into Hail Caesar for Warlord, basically. Yeah. Warlord games now. Rick never lets a good idea go to waste. But there was various games. Mark Latham, who became White Dwarf editor for a while, one of the guys in my role-playing group, he did a Trafalgar game for them as Wild West. Legends of the Wild West, I think it was called as well, and stuff. So they did actually quite a lot. And then Rob Broom, I forgot what it's called now, because he has a company now, and it is essentially like the equivalent of 2nd edition or 3rd edition Warhammer Ancient Battles, but with like the names filed off essentially. I've forgotten what his company's called now, but for people that want to carry on playing and stuff. So and he's got a business kind of carrying on with that. So yeah, that was a thing. When we were pitching ideas for the slot that Inquisitor eventually filled, one of them was called Warhammer 47, which was basically a World War II set of rules set in essentially the 40k mythos. So it was basically, like Soviet corn worshippers and Nazis of Slanesh or whatever. Again, it sort of replaced the traditional political leanings with kind of chaos influences and stuff like that. Which was the idea. It was like it would actually rather than Games Workshop doing all of the kind of the standard stuff, you don't want Games Workshop doesn't need to make another T34 or Sherman, but actually all the weird, wacky, cool stuff that you'd add on to it, all the weird chaos things and stuff.
And then you've got
back onto other ranges, but
we have Dust. Have you ever played a game called Dust Tactics or a thing that's called Dust
Tactics? Yeah,
I love Dust Tactics. I absolutely I got it from when Fantasy Flight did it back in the day. I got so much of that stuff. I've got I got 4 armies. I've got a massive German army, a Martian army, Allied army, a massive Cthulhu one. I've got shiny. I love that game. It's just because it was quite simple. It started off. It was square based, and I've got some of the dice in my drawer here, but it was like square based, and it wasn't overly complicated. Then they added in some sort of proper wargamey type rules to it in Dust Warfare.
that was Andy Chambers wrote Dust Warfare.
Yeah. And but I thought that was such a good game. The models were amazing as well. Like having like mech Shermans and having sort of like walkers and things like that. It was such the concept was amazing. I loved it. I love it.
Yes,
I love it.
There's Warlord have got Conflict 44, which again was somebody else, and they've bought out the range. And then. I don't think anyone's got Dust at the moment. They sort of imploded over a Kickstarter deal with Battlefront, and the problems of agreeing stuff in the back room and not actually writing contracts.
They disappeared after that Kickstarter. So it was the Babylon Kickstarter, I think, and it sort of like you said, they sort of imploded, but they're back because like in Manchester's Fanboy 3, they sell a lot of their stuff now. I can't remember who's dealing with it, but they seem to be. There's like a Polish company that I get mine called War Factory. I think it's called War Factory or something, but they're where I get my sort of Dust Tactics stuff from. And it's not like the cool Fantasy Flight sort of boxes you used to get, which were white with a picture on them. They're like cardboard. Like proper
Dust 19. Sorry, I've just done it. Dust 1947.
Yeah, 1947. That's it. Yeah, so they're
search.
Yeah, they're just selling, and they've got like I've got an Avatar of Cthulhu, which is an amazing model. It's basically a small Cthulhu type model with wings and stuff, and some of the Cthulhu stuff's really really good. And that's quite a good angle. And apparently they're going to be bringing in aliens and things like that into it as well. So it's going again now. Yeah.
Yep, some interesting stuff there.
Yeah. All right.
Yes.
Cool. Right. We'll leave it there. My deepest apologies for the technical difficulties. Unfortunately, you got the one time you wanted to work, it decides not to. But thank you very much for joining us, Gav. I really appreciate it, man. So interesting. Really, really interesting.
Always fun to hang out and chat hobby stuff.
yes. Like to be honest, I could probably carry on for ages, but my missus will kick my ass, and I'm pretty sure the others will get a knock on the door and told to leave.
Oh, my other half went to bed about an hour ago. She just said, just try not to wake me up.
I'm sleeping in the spare room tonight already anyway. So.
But yeah, amazing. Like I've got a million other things I could probably ask, but we could carry on for hours now. And it's just like one of those things. Like I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this. But I much appreciate the time, man.
I'll come back in a few weeks, maybe.
Yes. You're more than welcome whenever you want to come back on, man. Yeah, just to talk general nerdy stuff by all means.
Yeah, well, I say rather than
yeah. If you want to just talk, you just want to talk nerd, by all means, you're more than welcome anytime. But yes, for tonight, I've been Matt Geary. With me has been Mark Canty.
You seeing you?
I was going to say John Joe Cosgrove, but he's not with us today. He's always really with us today. The silent partner. Peter Ray Allison.
Stay safe and look out, Peter.
And Gav Thorpe.
Cheerio.
Cheers, guys. Thank you very much. See you later. Bye.